Thank you. So welcome everyone. Today we will be talking about promoting online learning success through increased access to online student readiness. Please remember that we will record this webinar and we will provide access to the recording at a later time. We'll provide more details in regards to how we will be doing that. Please keep in mind that at the bottom of your screen, I know some of us have already been tons of Zoom meetings, so you probably know how to use Zoom, but for those of you who may be new, you do have a toolbar that will come up once you put your cursor over the bottom or the top of your screen that will allow you to mute and unmute your microphone. We ask that everyone please mute their microphones during the presentation just to avoid any interruptions. But we will reserve some time to ask questions towards the end of the presentation. And then also please remember that in that same toolbar, you have access to a chat feature. We welcome all questions in the chat as we're going through the conversation. Okay, so again, welcome and thank you for being with us today. So I want to quickly just introduce myself. My name is Jessica Hurtado, and I'm the program supervisor for student experience with the California Virtual Campus Online Education Initiative. I also have my colleague here today with me, Bonnie Peters, who is the Chief Student Services Officer and Director of Student Experience for the California Virtual Campus Online Education Initiative. And I purposely have Bonnie Peters here with me today because we will be talking about the online readiness tutorials. And she was actually part of the process of developing those particular tutorials. So I'm happy to have Bonnie with me today. So just a little humor here. I know we've all been in webinars, team meetings at our campus, and I cannot stop thinking about this every time I see the view on our videos and our Zoom meetings. I definitely feel like I'm on the Brady Bunch. So, our students are definitely getting used to this way of learning. They're seeing their colleagues and peers, just like we are collaborating with each other, right? We're all a Brady Bunch. All right, so what will we cover today? So our objectives today is to really focus on, I wanna make sure that those who are in our audience today, if you are brand new and would like to know more about what is the online student readiness tutorials, that we have an opportunity to cover that. We will go back to the basics of when did this start? How do you adopt the CVC OEI online student readiness tutorials? And then we'll also tap into what are other colleges doing and how are they using the online readiness tutorials. And then lastly, we'll go into a conversation around recommendations and how to increase access to these resources. Particularly, how do we create a campus culture around who can have an impact on the access and the opportunities for our students to get to these types of resources. So let's talk a little bit about what are we talking about today, which resource. Online student readiness tutorials, or the OSRT, are a form of a tool that will help our students, both new online learners and experienced online learners, the opportunity to understand what does it mean to learn online, right? What are some of the challenges? What are some skills that they should be looking into, maybe if they already have those skills, or if they should be looking at developing new skills in order to have a successful experience in the online environment. As many of us have experienced this last year, so many of our students, right, have, some of them may not have even had the slightest goal of becoming a student online or learning online. They were face to face, they love learning on the campus, they love connecting with people in person. And that was just a way that they were expecting to continue learning last year. Obviously, for so many reasons, especially with COVID-19, our colleges had to transition everything to the online environment. So now we see those students who may not have ever expected to see themselves as an online learner now having to understand how to continue, one, the rest of their semester that was interrupted, and then also figuring out how will they continue to work on their educational goals as their new way of learning, right? Which is definitely an important piece to their planning as they continue to move forward in their educational goals. It's important to note that again, these particular resources are for both those who may be new to online learning and then those who may be experienced. And you'll take a we take a quick look at the screenshot that I have here. I actually took a picture of the different topics that are included. And there's 11 modules that specifically tap into, the general basics of just introduction to online learning, getting tech ready, organizing for online success, online study skills and managing time, communication skills for online learning, online reading strategies, career planning, educational planning, instructional support, personal support, and financial planning. All of these topics, as you can see, some would be perfect for those who are maybe brand new for the online learning experience, and other topics like maybe career planning or financial planning, right, may be some of those modules that maybe those who are already experienced online learners may want to learn a little bit more about something else that may impact their education as well, right? You'll also notice that we have 4 interactive tools, which include a cost calculator, computer readiness test, daily schedule calculator, and a study schedule. Nowadays, you could probably Google, tips to be an online or successful online student, and you'll see a lot of these topics come up, right? There's digital calendars now, there's digital everything now that definitely will have students thinking about what are those extra steps and extra tools that they may need when they're getting ready to learn online. So to talk a little bit about what these modules look like and how do students access these modules. So it's important to first note that these particular online readiness modules are actually completely free to all of our California community colleges. That means anybody, and even outside of the California community colleges, these modules were created through the California Virtual Campus Online Education Initiative. Like I mentioned before, my colleague Bonnie Peters and our colleague from a while back, Anita Crawley, they both collaborated to make sure that these resources were created for our California community college system. So again, these are completely free. Any college can access these modules, and we'll talk a little bit about where you can find them and how to access and embed these resources, whether that is in your Canvas shell, in your course, your website, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I wanted to highlight the fact that when these particular modules were created, we were making sure that all students were able to access these particular resources. So you'll notice that when a student clicks on the option to view a particular topic, they will actually have 3 ways of obtaining that information. They can either launch the multimedia presentation if they want to watch a quick video, or they can actually choose the text presentation, which will allow them to read the transcript or the script of the information that is being shared. And lastly, if the student prefers to just listen, they can access an audio MP3 file of the same information that is being shared. So this is a quick look. If a student were to select the Introduction to Online Learning, it tells the student about how long of a time commitment they should prepare to dedicate to that particular module. On this particular module, we see that it's 12 minutes long. It will allow the student to see the video on the right-hand side. It's an interactive video. On the left-hand side, they have 4 different tabs. The first one actually walks the student through the process of the conversation that is being had in that video. So that means the student's not just sitting there watching the video that was recorded, but they actually get to interact. So which is really neat. And I'll take you into the live version of this in a few minutes. But I wanted to showcase the different options that are available and to make sure that you understand that these videos are not just there for the student to just watch and just, sit there and just take it all in, but it'll actually cue the student to answer some questions to make it more fun and interactive. And it'll also have the student question, right? Like if they got the answer wrong, Why did they choose that answer, right? And maybe reflect on what they thought they knew or this new information that they are learning in that moment. The second tab allows the student to see the transcript. And then we have extra resources that will align with the topic. And lastly, of course, if the student needs help, they can access that option as well. So we're going to go into student access. So it's important to remember there's going to be different ways of adopting this particular tool, and we'll talk more about that. But right now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and select the link, which is available to all of you when we talk about adoption. And I'm going to take you straight to the actual website, which is on 3C Media, and that will show you what the live student facing version of these tutorials looks like. Okay, so give me a cue if I'm actually going to stop sharing. I'm going to switch screens really quickly. Please let me know if you can see that. Okay.
Yes.
So here we are. Perfect. Thank you. So once I allowed to I clicked on the browser to allow me to see the readiness modules. You'll notice, and please pay close attention, because there's two ways of viewing these modules. Okay, there's going to be a version for our students, again, the student facing, and then there's also another page that looks very similar, but you'll notice that at the top it will not say this is the student view. It's actually for us as administrators, faculty, whichever role we play. On the back end, we have a similar view, but you'll notice the biggest difference is that here on the students view, they will not see the option to download, right? They will not download any files here off of the front facing page. When you are on your page as the administrator that wants to incorporate these modules into their courses, it'll look very different, and I'll take you there when we're talking about adoption, okay? But for now, let's pretend I'm a student and I visit maybe the distance education website on my campus. And as many colleges have recently adopted and have previously had, they have a distance education homepage where they provide resources to students. I've seen this done a lot with the Canvas training modules. A lot of colleges, what they do is they set up a bundle of resources, right, for their students. So when they get into Canvas or they go into the distance ed page, they see all of the different resources and training opportunities that are available. Usually you see a quick video, how do you use Canvas, right? And then you'll notice that they'll include the readiness modules, in which I think is great, because it's one thing to know the technology and to learn the technology, but then there's also the other piece, that's the online learning part, right? Like, what are the skills and the tips on how to make sure that I'm using this technology the right way to be as successful as I can be? So let's take a look. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on this, on the first one, Introduction to Online Learning. When the student goes to the topic, again, they get to see the different options on how to view this information. If I go ahead and I launch the multimedia presentation, I will be back on this page that I was just showing you, and I can begin watching the video. I'm going to click the play option because I want you to see the interactive component of the video.
If you're watching this module, you've decided to investigate online learning as an alternative to a traditional classroom. But what will this really mean for you as a student? Here we're going to introduce you to the world of online learning. We're going to show you how it works, debunk a few common misconceptions about online learning environments, and explore some of the differences you will encounter when taking online courses rather than in a traditional classroom.
So you'll notice the conversation will begin, and it'll directly speak to the student, right? Like, what are your worries? What are your questions? What are you trying to find out? And it really leads the student, and I'm going to just kind of skip around here. It leads them into conversations and questions. So it's an interactive component. So let me skip to the myth number one, just so that you can see a couple of those examples.
I've heard that taking the online class is way easier than taking the class on campus. You don't even have to go to class. You just hand in the assignments and you're done.
The workload for any particular course is the same, regardless of the way it's delivered. And if you really think about it, there is more reading in an online class because you have to read all your teacher's instructions rather than hearing them in the class. In an online environment, you need to be more self disciplined and motivated because you won't be facing the instructor every session. The good news is that online classes will give you the flexibility to learn when you're ready to learn and at times that work with your schedule. This can be a real plus for students with busy lives. In an online class, you're not limited by class times.
So this is a really good example. There's students that are speaking to our students. And so this is a really important piece because when we are talking about, what do students want to hear? How do they want to hear the message? It's always well taken when it's coming from other students, right? Their fellow peers, knowing that they've experienced it as well. And so it's a really fun opportunity within these modules to bring that conversation back to our students who are trying to navigate this new way of learning. And so again, these modules were created in a way where it's interactive. It's almost like with the little red circle, it's poking fun, it's making it funny, and it's just in an essence of really trying to connect the conversation with the student. Okay, so I'll stop sharing and I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint really quickly. Okay. So with that being said, I did mention, right, that everyone has access to these modules. So all of our community colleges and even those outside of the community colleges can go into these links and download all of this content and use it in whatever way they want to back at their local campus. I want to also provide some updates. I know that some of you in the audience may already know about the online readiness tutorials, and I want to make sure that I provide the most updated information in regards to what are some of the most recent changes and specifically, if you haven't heard of the title Quest for Success program, I want to break that down a little bit more. Okay, so for those of you who are who have maybe worked with the CVC OEI previously, may have heard of what we call the Quest for Success program. So what was that? Back in 2016, again, my colleague Bonnie Peters and Anita Crawley both developed the Quest for Success program. The reason why it was not called just the online student readiness tutorials at that time is because it was bundled with a separate tool called Smarter Measure. And some of you may or may not have heard of Smarter Measure. That is a learning readiness indicator, a diagnostic where students can go in and answer questions to gauge where they are, right? What are some strengths, some weaknesses, some areas to focus on in order to, again, reach that success in the online environment. So when back before June 30th of just this last year, 2020, the CVC OEI was actually funding the Smarter Measure tool. We were fully funding that for all California community colleges. And again, remember, the online readiness tutorials are always and have always been free to our system as well. So when we paired those together, that created the Quest for Success program. Again, this has changed just on June 30th, 2020. The Smarter Measure Learning Readiness Indicator is no longer funded for all California community colleges. We actually, the CVC OEI is no longer funding it at all. If colleges are interested in continuing to use the Smarter Measure tool, they can definitely access the purchasing information through our foundations office. College Buys has the focus on really bridging out and building out the statewide purchasing opportunities for our system. So I wanted to make sure that that information was shared with all of you. And if colleagues of yours are asking or wondering about this particular piece, that this information can be shared back at your local campus. Okay. So how do we implement these tools? So I want to make sure that everyone also is aware that there have been some changes in the way that we are implementing the tool. And it's important that I tie this back to the fact that we are no longer funding the Smarter Measure piece, okay? Prior to June 30th, 2020, back when we were first rolling out the Quest for Success program, if you were using it at your local campus, you may have, you may remember that you would actually receive an update like every semester, every year, from my colleague Anita Crawley to give you the new files or the new export files to update and to give you new access every so often. And so we're no longer doing that. And we want to make sure that our colleges are aware that if you are still using the old version of the online uh, readiness Canvas shells that were there before, where we were exporting information back and forth, we're no longer going through that process. We want to make sure that colleges understand that you are free to really implement the readiness tutorials in any way that you find it to be as successful as possible at your campus. And we'll talk about some recommendations in a bit. So first, I want to show you, if you haven't experienced downloading or implementing any of these tools, I want to walk you through that process and show you what I was talking about, the difference between what do we see as administrators and as colleagues that are putting this together on the back end. What does the front facing student view look like, and what does our view look like? Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing really quickly and open the ecosystem portal. If you haven't visited the CVC ecosystem portal, I highly advise you to take a look. We have information regarding all of our resources, CVC OEI resources, available there. Any tool that you may have questions about, information is there on how to adopt the tool, any trainings that may be available, any live tutorial videos that may be available through the vendor, anything like that, you can actually find on this particular open Canvas shell. And so I'm saying open Canvas shell because literally you just have to click on the link and it will take you to the front page of this Canvas shell. Okay. So once you are here, you will go down to the online student readiness tutorials. Once you get there, of course, we have an awesome little introduction to remind you why online readiness is so important. Again, as you already know, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, we have over 2.1 million students. And think about, what this last year has really created for our students. Again, I highlighted the point that, so many of these students were not expecting to become online learners. And I think the important piece that we as administrators, coordinators, all of us as champions at our colleges, we have to recognize that, we ourselves may have taken a huge learning curve, right? Transitioning our courses or our services to the online environment. So we can empathize with the frustrations and the stress, right, behind transitioning into an environment that maybe we were not used to working or learning in that space. And so for this reason, we are really, pushing forward in this opportunity to connect our students to these resources that will help them ease that anxiety and that frustration of getting comfortable, or at least being able to somewhat feel comfortable in the space that they have to be in. Okay. So as we navigate the ecosystem portal, you'll notice that we break down the information for your campus. We show you the different topics that are available, and we even broke down the tabs into the different topics. So if you are interested, we highly encourage you to either link the students to the page that I showed you, right, where we get to the 3C Media page and the student can freely choose whichever topic they like, or you can take the individual topic and embed the individual topic in any area that you'd like. So for example, if you're teaching a course, if you're a faculty member, you can actually incorporate these different topics into your course. You could potentially create an activity, extra credit assignment, or graded assignment, however you choose to do that. And you can actually select, if you don't want to include all 11 topics, you can go in and only take the ones that you feel, or maybe take a temperature in the room, right? And say, hey, students, what would you like to learn more about, right? Or maybe tell the students, we're going to cover the first 3 topics, right? The first half of the semester, and maybe we'll cover the other three, and you may not get to all of them, but something is better than nothing, right? And so how do you incorporate this in a way that will be effective for your space and your time and your timeline for teaching the content in your course, and then also for your students to be able to access this as they go along through your course. I know a lot of colleagues that have been incorporating the readiness modules also as a companion course. I've seen other colleges that have also included the readiness modules just as an option within their Canvas shell. So no matter what class the student is taking, they can actually access outside of their course a separate shell that is just filled with resources for them as they're navigating learning in the Canvas environment. Okay, so again, it breaks it down to all of the details in regards to what this topic will cover, and then what are the activities and how long the activity will take. So this is being respectful of your time and the student's time at the same time. And then we have how to adopt and how to install the Canvas option in through the Creative Commons. So we wanted to again touch on the fact that again we're not going to continue sending out any Canvas shells or any updated Canvas shells as like we used to. Okay, we're asking colleges to really create and download their own version of what the online readiness tutorials can look like inside of Canvas if that's the way you want to go. Again, you have two ways of really installing the tool. One, you can either download a shell from the Creative Commons options. This is a particular shell that our own colleague, Anita Crawley, created for Monterey Peninsula College. She made it very simple. If you visit this link for the Quest for Success, that is what she listed the title, you will find that you can actually access the Canvas shell. And then once you import the Canvas shell, you can actually customize it, right? So right now, again, she's using this for Monterey Peninsula College. But again, if you're at Chaffey or if you're at Columbia College, wherever you are, you can take this shell, it's already integrated, every section is already there. And at that point, you can customize to meet the needs of your students at your local campus. If you do not want to include one of these topics, you can easily take it out. Again, you can play with this to customize it to your needs at your local campus. Again, the other option that I mentioned before is to use the link that takes you straight to the 3C Media website. When we click there, again, take a look at the difference between what we were looking at previously, which is the student version, see here, right? Versus what we're looking at right now. So again, I'll do that one more time. Here's the online student readiness tutorials, very clean, no download option, just the interactive tutorials, and the student can select the topic. If I go back, sorry about that, let me go over here. If I go back to the main page, you'll notice this is for us, the ones who are going to be integrating the tool. So again, this is not the student view, so please be careful if you are going to link your students, make sure it is the right link. You'll notice the biggest difference here is that the interactive tutorials have the title over here, but then have a download option on the right. Again, when I talk about customizing and choosing how many tutorials to use at a time, you can go easily in here and download that individual topic. You can download 3, 4, however many you'd like. And so again, this is really an option for us as the ones that will be creating the resource for our students. Okay, I'll stop there and see if anyone has any questions regarding this information that I'm sharing here. Okay, so I see, can we access these for free? Yes, absolutely. What is the URL for us to get the? Yes, so great question. So I will include the URLs in, we'll give you access to the PowerPoint, and then I'll also make sure to take some of these links and put them in the chat before we go. Okay, awesome. Oh, and I see that Karen is helping me include these. Perfect. Okay, so I don't see any other questions so far. I hope that was clear. So again, adoption can, two options of adopting. You can bring in the Canvas shell from Creative Commons and start customizing in your individual Canvas instance. Or again, you have access to the direct link to the modules, which you can place, as if you guys are familiar with the links, you can put them anywhere, right? Which goes into the next conversation that I want to have, which, let me go back to my PowerPoint. Okay. So again, we're talking about, the ease in making sure that we are creating an access point for our students. How can they find it, right? That's the key. There's a recent study through Ed Trust West that they were talking about how so many colleges are offering resources, but when they went out and they created a survey for our students, so many of our students were replying that they really needed, mental health services, that they really needed, tutoring services, that they needed all of these resources. And there was such a high percentage of these students saying that they needed it, but didn't know their college had it. Right. And that just broke my heart, because here I am, I'm working with DE coordinators, I'm working with tutoring directors, and, they're working hard to make sure that these services are available on campus. And then there's this disconnect, right? Where the student is saying, I need it, and the college is saying, we have it. And the issue here is that they're not connecting, right? The student is not finding where that door is located to go in and get that resource. And so that's why we really want to make sure, if there's one message that I really want you guys to take today, is really, where are we placing these links? Where are we showcasing the resources? Are we embedding them? Are they like 5 clicks into your website? Are they 10 clicks into your website, right? Are they on every page that the student could potentially go to? If they're on the counseling page, will they find the readiness tutorials there? Or are they only going to find it inside of Canvas? How many options are the students able to have in order to make sure that they can get to the resource? Okay. And so I have a couple of examples here. Chaffey College did a great job. I keep forgetting I have to keep switching screens because I'm sharing my screen. Sorry about that. So Chaffey College did something with their Canvas shell. And so when I was mentioning before, they're giving their students a quick intro. This is not a course. This is another option for the student. So as you know, when a student goes into a Canvas, to their Canvas dashboard, they see the little cards, right, for their individual courses. You can customize one of those little cards to just meet the needs of your students. That can be that Canvas and technology support card, right? That little course card that can create an opportunity for the student to click and find all of these resources, right? Here, Chaffey did this, including introduction to Canvas. They did an awesome quick little video, right? Letting the student know, how do you get started? They have the Canvas navigation basics, right? Course navigation basics, preparing for an online course, right? And then the student readiness tutorials. So this is a perfect example of how they quickly selected the option, and then they take the student back to that home page that we were talking about, where it will include all of the tutorials as they begin to navigate the topics. Okay, awesome. So with that being said, I want to also talk a little bit about the future of online instruction. As we know, COVID-19 just really pushed us into a quick emergency response, right? But as we've been navigating these last few months, we have to keep in mind that, as far as I know, online instruction, it's going to continue. We're still online these next few semesters. We don't know what the fall will look like just yet, but as of now, we're still online. And it's important to also remember, right, that some of these students who went through the transition back in spring of 2020, some are coming back and some are not coming back, right? We've seen a drop in enrollment, but at the same time, we have to remember that some of these students are continuing. And how can we continue to help them stay in this learning environment as we all try to continue moving forward? The idea is that online instruction has been around for many years, but now it's just been highlighted at a higher level where now everybody's an online student. It's no longer just a percentage of our student population that is learning online. Now it's everyone. And so we need to make sure that if we're creating these resources, if we're creating institutional changes, that they are exactly that, that these are going to be institutional long-term changes that will continue to support our students even when we are ready to open the college up for face-to-face instruction. The fact is that these resources and preparing our students is the key to success. Even if some of these students will go back to face-to-face instruction, it is really crucial that they at least go back with the skill set that if at any point, whether that's an emergency for the entire state or maybe it's a personal emergency where they find themselves having to learn online, they are ready to do it, right? It's not starting from scratch. It's almost this perspective of being proactive versus reactive, right? Really making sure that even if the student never takes an online class at some point, they still have the skill sets that they're confident enough that if they need to take it, if they need to take a course online, they will be confident enough to go in and be able to take it, right? So here's a quick quote that I was reading inside higher ed, and it said 90% of undergraduate students at research universities plan to continue their education in the fall, despite the COVID-19 pandemic. However, 9% of students are unsure and 1% say they won't re-enroll. According to the student experience at Research University COVID-19 survey, the report uses data from 19,155 students, and this is from 5 public research universities. 90% of those undergraduate students are returning. So that means, again, just like as we're transitioning our services to the online environment, we are continuing to find ways, right, to make sure that the resources are sustainable, that we have the right technology in place, that we are really working hard to make sure that our online instruction, our online services are just continuing to progress and get better and meet the needs of our students. All right. And so with that, I want to talk a little bit more about, well, how do we increase access to online readiness? How do we make sure that students can find these resources, right? So one big piece that I want to highlight today is really having conversations on your campus on how this can become or translate into a campus-wide effort. When we talked about online readiness prior to COVID-19, there was a really big focus on instruction. So a lot of faculty were the ones who were, having this time to really incorporate. Again, we mentioned they've used it as companion courses. They've built out credit around the tool. It was really neat to see how faculty can really incorporate these resources, because that tells me that the faculty is really thinking of their students in a sense of preparation and just seeing them through a holistic lens, right? Because that faculty member is understanding that every student that's walking through that virtual door is really coming in with different levels of online learning experience. And at the same time, as we know, every student has a diverse way of learning, right? And a diverse experience of learning online. And so the more resources that we can incorporate into these courses, the better it's going to be for our students. The other option that hasn't really been talked about too much is counseling. Our counselors are, frontline staff. They're meeting with their students all of the time. How do we get our counselors to become aware of these resources? And how do we make sure that it can be part of that opportunity and that conversation just as much as the educational plans are at the forefront of the conversations? How do we also make sure that these readiness tools, the online readiness tools, are part of the conversations? Again, even if a student says that they are going online or if they're not. Then we have learning communities. With learning communities, I'm actually uh, an alumni of the California Community Colleges. I attended San Diego City College, and I was a former puentista, or I should say, I'm still a puentista at heart. And I know that in these learning communities, we have an audience, we have a group, we have a cohort of students. It's important to recognize that we are, again, preaching to a choir, we are serving the largest percentage of students of color. And a lot of our communities, I know in our learning community specifically, we have a large cohort of our students. And a lot of times when we're looking at data right now that's coming, based on what has happened through COVID-19, our students of color are the most highly impacted by this change. And so how do we make sure that when we're talking to our students and we're preparing our students, I know that the learning communities are meant to really fully support the cohort that is in that learning community to make sure that they are successful as they continue moving forward. And online readiness needs to be a component of how they prepare the students as they navigate, whether that is the community college or when they transfer to a university. Um, your website, right? Our CVC OEI team, we had an equity work group. They created an analysis of our CCC websites. They observed 33 different college websites, and it was surprising to see the difficulty that it was for even just ourselves to navigate some of our websites, right? We were going through like 9 to 10 different clicks to just get to the distance education page or the resource and counseling and whatever it is. And I'm not pointing out any colleges, I'm just saying, it's that moment that I think in this recent transition has really opened our eyes to some of those simple changes that could go a really long way. And even just the website, the way we're designing them, where are these resources? Are they on the front page? Are they highlighted? Are they right? Like, do we have arrows pointing at what we need the student to see? All of that is crucial as we're talking about access. And then, of course, your learning management system. We provided an example of how you can incorporate this into the Canvas learning management system. And then lastly, this very important conversation, I know Bonnie Peters and I were discussing this quite a bit, is, how do we change the way, or how do we have the conversation about potentially, right, incorporating online readiness into how we historically have developed new student orientations, right? Because if we think about it, new student orientations and online readiness combined can really hit a conversation around equity, right? And how we want to address the equity gap specifically in the online environment. We have to recognize that, again, as we move forward, online education is no longer only for 20 to 30% of our student population. It's really going to be something that some of these students who maybe never thought they would be in an online course may actually have liked it, right? Maybe they realized it works for them. And now we're going to have an increase of those students who may come back and officially become online students. And so we want to continue to make sure that we are adapting our policies and the ways that we are addressing even just a new student orientation to make sure that we are including distance education. So what are our next steps for CVC OEI in particular? So because I am the supervisor for the student experience, I have a charge to really look into our ecosystem tools. So that web page that I sent you as well, the Canvas shell that incorporates all of the tools, we are looking at how do we review these particular tutorials, okay? The student readiness tutorials, we are going to review them. We want to collaborate with our community colleges. And I was also thinking of how we can incorporate the learning communities. I made a good point just a few minutes ago about, having a cohort of students. So that is an audience that we already have in these learning communities, and really dive into student feedback, because we want to know what about these tutorials works for our students. What seems maybe, times change. So is there anything that seems outdated for them? Is there anything that they wish we would have included, right? So we want to make sure that we can get this feedback. And we are hoping that we can collaborate. If any of you here today are interested in being a part of this or going back to your campus and potentially asking if they would like to participate, it would be a survey, of course, and connecting with, again, different courses, classes, or even just your learning communities, whoever would like to participate, right? We could definitely connect. I included our support at cvc.edu email because will lead to me. And so I can get your name, email, your campus name if you'd like to participate and help us. Once we review and get this feedback, the CVC OEI will make the necessary changes in order to meet the needs and suggestions from our students. And so again, if this means incorporating, different visuals from the simple details, we want to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our students. So I would really highly encourage you to send us an email if you are interested in participating and helping us really take a dive into what we can change and make positive changes and how we provide these resources. Okay. So questions, anybody questions? I hope I was pretty clear. I know I went pretty fast. No. Okay, again, these resources are free. You can definitely, if you want to share this information with your colleagues, again, we will share the recording of this webinar. We have future webinars coming up as well. We have our events calendar on the cvc.edu website. If you select the events calendar, you will be able to see everything else that we have available. And then, of course, our @ONE YouTube channel will showcase our webinar recording. So thank you so much for being here today and listening to this information. Again, if there are any links or any information that you wanted and we didn't provide, please send us an email at support@cvc.edu and we will get that to you. Thank you.
We also have a poll if you would take just a few minutes. Let me get that going. Do you all see that?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you again. Have a great day. Thank you.